Why do we need ham or amateur radio? It's a question that I know many of you ponder, and the answer is quite simple. Ham radio allows for local and planet-wide communications when all other forms of communications fail. Today's world is connected by complex forms of communications, namely cellular communications and the internet. These forms of communication are very easy to use, but rely on massive infrastructure between two individuals communicating. If one cog in that wheel breaks, the whole thing can come crashing down. Conversely, amateur radio relies only on the two parties involved, the electronic epitome of individual responsibility. Just a few things are needed on either end: power, a radio, an antenna, and depending on the mode of communications, maybe a few accessories. In this series, we will show you how ham radio, and frankly, the entire radio spectrum, can be an indispensable tool in emergencies large and small. The radio spectrum is huge. You can think of it as millions of channels to which you can tune into. To learn all about what is available to you is a lifelong endeavor, but learning just a few basics is rather simple. So that's where I'll start. There are two basic types of communication in the ham universe: communicating short range and worldwide communications. In ham speak, I'm referring to VHF and HF communications, or very high frequency and high frequency. Being new to amateur radio, you may have no idea what this means. So let's talk about it with some examples, starting with short range communications. Let's say that you need to keep in contact with friends, family members, or even local emergency responders. You are going to need to use a certain portion of the radio spectrum that is conducive to local communications, a portion of that spectrum that offers clarity and reliability and possibly extreme portability. A proven solution to local communications has always been the very high frequency portion of the spectrum, or VHF. VHF is chosen by police, fire, air traffic, dispatching, FM radio, TV, and businesses. And there's a nice section of the band that's carved out for you and I as well. The term VHF refers to the frequency, in the case of VHF, that is 30 to 300 megahertz. As amateur radio operators, our little slice of the pie is right in the middle from 144 to 148 megahertz. But being new to ham radio, that probably means nothing to you. So let's show you how it works in the real world. This is a prepper's favorite, the Baofeng UV5R. This little $30 radio and a $15 test is all it takes for you to get started in ham radio, but more on that later. For now, there's a link below to our article on how to get your ham license in 7 days. What can you do with this radio? Well, in its most basic method of communication, say one Baofeng to another, or simplex communication as it's termed, you basically have two low-powered radios with small antenna. How well this radio works is dependent on the laws of physics and is directly tied to the characteristics of VHF frequencies. While VHF is mostly unaffected by atmospheric noise, giving you clear and reliable communications, it is restricted to line-of-sight communications. Simply put, line-of-sight communications means things like mountains, hills, large buildings, and most importantly, the Earth itself can disrupt the signal. Let's take an example of two people standing on relatively level ground. Because of the curvature of the Earth, there is a limited distance that these two can have line of sight before the Earth itself gets in the way. In the case of these two radios, the antennas are, say, 6 feet above the ground. The distance to where the Earth starts blocking the signal due to the curvature is 3 miles. This is called the radio horizon. For the other individual, the distance is also 3 miles. Added together, two people with Baofengs can theoretically talk to each other from 6 miles apart. In reality, if you have trees, buildings, small hills, or other terrain, you are probably going to be limited to just a mile or two. While a mile or two is more than enough to talk to your own property and to your own neighborhood, what do we do to extend this coverage, yet still use these convenient handheld radios? Dotting a landscape around the world are repeaters. What do? Exactly what their name implies. They take the signal that you transmit, receive it, then repeat it. Generally speaking, these repeaters are publicly available to licensed ham operators and are run mostly by preparedness-minded individuals. Lots of these repeaters operate on backup power for use in emergencies, and some are perpetually powered by the likes of solar and other renewable forms of backup. These repeaters are most often located in ideal locations, that is, high up in the air. The higher the antenna, the further the radio horizon. Combined with the fact that the antennas themselves are really efficient, they can help the range of your handheld radio go from a few miles to 50 miles or more. There's a third option for the preparedness-minded individual, and that is to set up your own repeater. Mobile radios such as my Kenwood TM-V71A have a feature called cross-band repeat. In normal operation, these types of radios operate just the same as your handheld, but you can permanently install a bigger antenna much higher up in the air. The radios also have more power, and you can choose to back up that power with a system that you control. Check out the links below on our solar series for more on that one. The function of crossband repeat allows them to receive on one band and simultaneously transmit on another, effectively creating your own repeater. In a future video, we will show you exactly how to do this. But for now, there are some links below to radios that can do this. Now, keep in mind, the performance of this system is dependent on your antenna, its height, the terrain around your location, and so on. But it should greatly enhance the range of a communication system that you own and control. Lastly, we'll talk about HF communications, or high frequency. This is the type of communication an outsider to amateur radio might picture. HF communications allows you to talk to the world. HF consists of different frequencies compared to VHF, between 3 and 30 megahertz, and these frequencies have different characteristics. For example, some of your signal when you key up on the Baofeng actually radiates directly out into outer space. HF is different. The radio waves actually bounce off the ionosphere, called skip propagation, allowing for communications that are not limited to line of sight. This skip can allow interstate to intercontinental communications. There's many reasons for this, and it's way outside the scope of this video, but communicating with the states around you can be relatively reliable, and depending on the conditions of the bands, you can talk to the world. With my modest setup, it's more of like firing a signal out there, bouncing off the ionosphere, and wherever it lands, it lands. I'm right here in the Great Lakes, and I've talked to both coasts, Europe, South America, and listened to the world. The most important fact you have to remember about all of this is there's nothing that exists between your radio and theirs. No infrastructure to rely on. You control it, and nobody can shut you up. HF radio will be the de facto mode of communications in a regional, national, or worldwide disaster. The downside to HF is the equipment can be quite expensive. While I would expect each and every one of you to get licensed, have a radio like the Baofeng, and know how to use it, HF radio takes a little more knowledge, a general license, and a bit more equipment. If considering new, the cost of entry to the HF world is going to be around $1,000. This is my ICOM IC7200, in multicam of course. It's not the absolute least expensive HF radio, but for what it does, it's one of the best deals. With an HF rig, in addition to the radio, you'll need a power supply, antenna, and antenna tuner. Also, the antenna might not be what you picture in your mind as an antenna. The most popular type of HF antenna is the dipole, basically two pieces of wire that are spread horizontally as opposed to vertically. This requires you to have some real estate and a place to hang the antenna. Just like in our solar series, I tend to pick a vendor to work on with complicated systems. In the case of amateur radio, I like to work with Gigaparts. They've got a very knowledgeable staff of licensed enthusiasts, a huge inventory, and the best prices in the industry. My plan with this series is to give you specific examples of all the modes of communications that we just mentioned, so you can follow along. Check out Gigaparts in the links below. Communications are one way the prepper can utilize the radio spectrum. But stay tuned, as our series on radio is about to blow your mind. If you found this information insightful, drop us a comment, hit the like button below, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the Tin Hat Ranch channel. Thanks for watching.